want to get right to the core. So you want to know what it's all for. So you want to come off knowing more. Well, you better get hip. The podcast by George. So you want to get straight to the show. So you want to know what you need to know. You want to know what we're all here for. Well, you better get hip. The podcast by George. Podcast by George. Podcast by George. He knows what he's fighting for. It's podcast by George. Podcast by George. Want to know what we're fighting for?
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome to another podcast by George. We're talking post office today, and I wanted to background this a little bit. I love talking about the old days. Maybe people do that. Maybe everybody does that when they get old, and folks, I'm getting there. But, and I've mentioned on the podcast before, I grew up on the farm. I grew up on a dirt road. I grew up isolated out there. And I'm telling you something, the Postal Service was a big part of my childhood. It was a big deal. I mean, you could stand at the end of the driveway and wait for the guy delivering the mail because you knew about when he came, and sometimes he'd be one of only a few cars that would come down the road all day. And as a little kid, I'd stand out there and wait for him to show up and, get that mail and run it into the folks. And it was a big deal to them, too, again, because we were on the farm and we were isolated. That mail was our link to the wide world that the internet provides us now. I mean, that the paper came that way. It was something that I'll always remember with fondness. And then as I got older, moved into the business world, and just in my own personal experience, I always liked the post office. And the irony of it is I worked in the marketing world. I worked in the magazine business, and I would work for these business owners that were, let's just say they were Republican mostly. These guys never liked the post office. I could never figure it out because, I'm working, doing the marketing. The post office was always on time. Stuff always got delivered. It was always affordable. It was the lifeline for these companies. I mean, their solicitations went out in the mail for their magazines. Then their magazines went out. I mean, it was all good. It all worked. But they were always opposed to the post office. Why? Well, this post office thing goes way back, and here's as far back as I know that it goes, this attack on the post office. It goes back to Ronald Reagan. I talk about him all the time on the show. I mean, you can put his presidency at the doorstep of most of the problems in this country right now, and the Koch brothers. Back again during the Reagan presidency during the 80s, they wanted to privatize the post office. To make it work better? Nah, just to get some cronies, some billionaires owning something that had been run by the government. The Postal Service, it's a service. It works great. I love it. I don't have any complaints at all. We just went through a derecho here in the state of Iowa when I didn't have any electricity, didn't have any water, didn't have any sewage removal. I got my mail, folks. I mean, the post office is always there for you. And now where are we? Well, that damn thing's in danger of collapsing, they tell us. I can't believe that. But if you look at the news, they say it's because they were required to fund their retirement 80 years out or something like that. And it put them in a cash strap situation, and Trump apparently is working as hard as he possibly can, although he denies that, to cut the legs out from under the Postal Department. So I thought, I got to get somebody on that knows something about this, and I know a guy, and he's been on the podcast by George before, and it's Brian Maclaine, and he's with the American Postal Workers Union, Local 44. He's a friend of the podcast, and Brian, welcome back to the PBG.
Thank you, George. Glad to be here.
All right, so let's get started with this. Trump says, no, we're not doing anything like that. The Postal Service isn't doing anything to slow down mail. Just talking about your personal knowledge here on a local basis. Have you seen any evidence of this?
We're in a better spot here in Des Moines than a lot of the other places are, but we have had machines shut down. We've lost two sorting machines, letter sorting machines, one just as recently as last week. This is a nationwide thing. We heard about it. It was something that almost 700 machines are getting pulled out of commission. I know, the only explanation we've been given by the new Postmaster General is it's a cost-saving measure, but it's not. There's no cost to be saved from this at all. These machines were working fine. These machines were working great. They were being used on a daily basis. And even to the extent in which we were having trouble getting time to work on the machines to do the regular oil changes every day, they were using those machines to get the mail out. We still have been able to get the mail out here in Des Moines. I know that's not the case elsewhere. Mail's starting to pile up in a lot of different places. But we're working our hardest in order to make sure that we get the mail where it needs to go when it needs to get there.
Well, now I know another postal worker. It's not Brian, folks. It's somebody else. This person told me that some mail that would normally go out that day doesn't go out. It's actually, it goes out, but it's delayed. It's not going out as quickly as it has before. Have you seen any evidence of that type of thing?
It's a little bit harder for me some of that stuff usually takes place at the stations. I have never been a carrier, so I don't know what their situation is. But I do know that things are starting to kind of build up, and we were essentially told by the Postmaster General that if you don't make this particular dispatch, any mail that comes in after that, doesn't matter when it shows up, you don't wait for it, you just go out and you deliver what you have. That's not right. Yeah. We have a overtime moratorium, essentially a ban. And usually if we are running late, we run late. We get the people that we need to run that mail, and we make sure we get every ounce of mail that needs to go out that day out. It's being hamstrung. It's getting harder.
Now, you've been at this for a while. I mean, you're not as old as I am, but you've got experience and knowledge in this. What we're looking at now are some imminent strikes against the post office. But have you seen this longer term over the past several years, or maybe even longer than that, an effort to starve the post office out? And what I'm thinking of, I see some of the postal carriers, and they're in their own cars, and some of the delivery trucks don't look as well taken care of as they used to. It's like they're trying to get every last mile out of them that they possibly can. Is the post office kind of being skinnied down continually?
That was kind of started with what you ended up mentioning earlier, when George W. Bush ended up signing into law a pre-fund retirement law that requires the post office to pay retirement well into advance. We're the only government agency that's required of. Ever since then, it's just kind of been this constant, we're losing money, we need to shut down post office. We need to cut corners. We need to cut the fat. And we've been losing positions. We've been losing bids to attrition because of that. We're operating at a far lower number of people than we typically do. And we're working harder because of it to make sure the mail gets out. I don't know about the Reagan years. I've only heard about those. I started at the post office about 1996. But I did hear that there were plenty of efforts to try and defund the post office, try to deregulate the post office, and try to privatize. And privatize has always been kind of something that the union's been on the lookout for, and trying to nip that in the bud whenever it happens. This time is a little bit different because we have mailboxes, drop boxes being removed in certain cities. We have the promise that they're not going to remove any more drop boxes, but now I'm seeing pictures of drop boxes being locked up and you can't use them. I am not really at liberty to discuss what I think the motivations are behind this. But I will say that the Postmaster General does have a history of union breaking. Postmaster General is a businessman and has never worked in the post office once, and that is a big problem because the post office is kind of its own system, if you work through the post office, you understand how it works. It's a really complex system that you have to you need to be brought up in. And the postmaster generals beforehand always came from, they were once a clerk, they were once a mail handler, they were once a carrier.
Good idea.
Yeah. This guy has no idea how the post office works, and he's just doing whatever. And it's really causing a strain.
Well, and he's also one of these oligarchs. He's one of these rich guys that is being so roundly and rightfully so criticized. He's vested in competitors to the post office. That's got to make you instantly suspicious. And if anybody thinks, well, just let UPS deliver the mail or FedEx or whatever the case might be, well, UPS and FedEx, correct me if I'm wrong in this, but the post office delivers mail to locations that they won't because their cost-effective routes don't cover some areas, and the post office picks that up, and if it weren't for them, there's mail that wouldn't be getting delivered right now. Am I correct in that?
Yep, we do last mile delivery to a lot of rural areas for FedEx, for UPS, for Amazon. Amazon has their own delivery drivers. You see them around urban areas. Don't see them so much around places like Kelly or, just smaller towns all around the place. We do that last mile. That's what we're organized to do. We are the best run and one of the most trusted government agencies in the world. And that's for a reason. It's all about getting the mail out, and go ahead.
No, I was going to say some of these things I know you're not at liberty to speak to, but one that you touched on really raised my eyebrows when I saw it. The fact that they're picking up drop boxes in some locations. Now, there's no cost savings associated. There's no efficiency associated with picking up drop boxes. Drop boxes are there. They're already paid for. They're in place. The only way to pick up drop boxes is if you don't want to have mail in them. Is there any other rationale for that you know of?
It might be to shrink routes for collections, for people that go around to collect the mail, but it really wouldn't make that big of a difference, in my opinion. You might end up saving a one or two positions. That's about it. To this extent, and the piles of blue boxes you see pictures of coming out of places like Wisconsin, there's no rationale for that. There's no reason for it whatsoever. And Oregon, lots of people were talking how, well, they were removing drop boxes because of the riots out there. Well, there's no real riots going on out there, for one, and two, where are the riots in Wisconsin when they're picking up these drop boxes? There's absolutely no reason for it whatsoever.
Oh, God love them. I mean, I really like the post office, and I got to tell you, I was looking out the window, standing in the front yard, waiting for a Warren Buffett-owned Mid-American power truck to come down my street and get me some juice during this derecho thing, and I looked down at the end, and here comes the little carrier putting up there. The mail's coming, folks. They get that mail delivered. And she pulled up by the driveway, and I asked her, I said, where were you at when this storm hit? Now, this derecho thing, a couple of wind gusts were in the 100-mile-an-hour category. We're talking low-level tornado, low-grade hurricane. And she's out in this little truck, She says, well, she was in this small town near us, and she was delivering mail and had to run into a Get and Go, which is like maybe the world's worst place to be. It's all glass, no basement, that type of thing. But ran in there, was afraid that it was going to take her life, and they're out delivering the mail, and it got to me pretty much on time through the whole thing. Reminds me, I digress a little bit, but there's a blues rock outfit that I like, where they were real popular not too long ago. Alabama Shakes, and Brittany Howard's the lead singer of that. She used to be a mail delivery person. She was, and she always tells the story. She quit it when she had to run inside a customer's home because there was a tornado, and she said, I'm going to go to a full-time music career. I am done delivering the mail. It reminds me, I want to read this because people watch the podcast to hear points of view. They also watch to learn things. So this says, while the Postal Service has no official motto, the popular belief that it does is a tribute to America's postal workers. Quote, neither snow nor rain nor heat nor gloom of night stays the couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds. It's not the official post office service motto, though it appears chiseled in gray granite over the entrance of the James A. Farley building at 8th Avenue and 33rd Street in Manhattan. The phrase comes from Book 8, paragraph 98. Now, I didn't know this, of the Persian Wars by Herodotus, a Greek historian. During the wars between the Greeks and Persians, the Persians operated a system of mounted postal carriers who served with great fidelity. The firm of McKim, Mead, and White designed the post office, which opened to the public on Labor Day in 1914, and one of the firm's architects, William Mitchell Kendall, was the son of a classic scholar and read Greek for pleasure. He selected the neither snow nor rain inscription, which he modified from a translation by Professor George Herbert Palmer of Harvard University, and the Post Office Department approved it. The popular belief, it says, that Herodotus' description of the Persian Gulf or Persian Postal Service was about the United States Postal Service is a tribute to the men and women who've delivered mail reliably and dependably through all conditions for centuries. Yeah, for centuries. The first, Postmaster General, Brian, was Benjamin Franklin?
It was, and post office predates the Constitution of the United States. We're enshrined in it. I'm a history guy myself, and the reason why the post office was started was because that was how people got their information. That's how they got their news. We're a democracy. People need information in order to make decisions on these things, and that's what the post office was around for. And we continue to serve the American public, and we're a universal service. Anybody, doesn't matter what class, what race, what anything, where you're at, it costs a 55-cent stamp to send a letter anywhere. And it's again one of the best run services in the country. And that's exactly what it is. It's a service.
Exactly.
I hear a lot of people say it's a monopoly. No, monopolies are business. We are a government service. We're here to service the American people. And let me tell you, one of the best things about my job is the fact that my labor goes towards the American people. It doesn't go towards buying a third vacation home for some CEO somewhere. My labor goes towards serving the American people. And just like any other postal worker, all the way from custodian all the way to the carrier that delivers your mail, our primary duty is to make sure that mail is protected and gets to where it needs to go in as efficient and quick means as possible. It is our solemn duty to do that.
That's well said. Before we leave this topic now, is there anything about what's going on either through Congress or at your local facility or anything that you'd like for people to know when it comes to the venerable USPS?
Only that we are persevering the best we can. We're fighting back against any of these things that is violating the sanctity of the mail, in our opinion. That's getting in the way of doing our duty of delivering the mail to people. And again, we're persevering and just doing our jobs. That's what we're here to do. And we're going to weather this just like we weathered Reagan, just like we weathered W. And we'll make it through on the other end. This is the People's Post Office, and we're going to keep it that way.
Well, I love the effort to save it, and one thing I like about it is a service. It also is an example of good socialism. For everybody out there watching the podcast, every time they hear that word, they think they've stuck their finger in a light socket. Folks, the Postal Service is a perfect example of what we're talking about the good that can be done and the cost savings that can be incurred with a socialist program like this that serves everyone, rich and poor. That's the most important part of it. No matter how poor you are, no matter if you're a barefoot kid on a dirt road, and there are still barefoot kids on dirt roads in this country, folks, you can still look down the road and that lifeline's coming. If you can't afford the internet, that lifeline's coming. The Postal Service is going to connect you to the world. And that's just a great thing. And I'm glad to hear that you're confident it's going to survive. And I'm glad that our elected leaders are finally getting off the dime maybe and going to address this issue that's been languishing really, but it appears to be coming to a head now. And that takes us to the next topic I wanted to talk about, because Brian is not only a member of American Postal Workers Union Local 44, he's the chairman of the Iowa Democratic Progressive Caucus, and he's a delegate at the United States, the U.S. Democratic Convention now underway. And Brian, Can you tell us just briefly what's that like, as particularly being done electronically?
Electronically, I will have to say, I watched a lot of my friends at the 2016 convention. Not as much excitement around it, but I will say it was my honor to be able to go and be a voice for the Sanders delegation and to cast my vote for Sanders against the platform that did not include Medicare for All and for the rules. That was my primary job and duty, and I fulfilled that, and that was enough for me. It is not, I was looking forward to going to Milwaukee, and up until the point they said that I would likely not be allowed into the convention physically, I was planning on still attending. But at the same time, it was a great honor to be elected as a delegate and to serve the progressives in that way.
Well, and the platform is important to a certain extent. I think the Democratic president probably would pay more attention to it. But if you look at it with the Republicans, with Trump, I don't think he could tell you what a plank in the Republican platform even is or what it was when he was elected. Doesn't make any difference for that party on that side of the ledger. But I'm glad you voted against the platform because of the Medicare for All provision. Now, as a fellow progressive, a couple of other things that I'm real keen on, in addition to that, obviously, are the climate and the Green New Deal, or something even stronger than that, based on what we're seeing. And the derecho is a good example, and an end to these senseless killer regime change wars. And you voted against the platform. Do you see any progress being made on those two fronts?
There's a little bit of progress, but clearly the platform did have parts in it that were worthy of being voted in favor of. Medicare for All was the line in the sand for a lot of us. But as far as the Green New Deal, that was voted down. We did move a little bit further left than what Biden was suggesting. But I still think there's a lot of work to do. And as for the regime change wars, they ended up putting in support for Israel's annexations and so on. I'll just leave it at that. The platform may not really matter to a lot of candidates from what we've seen. They just kind of ignore it once they end up getting into office, a lot of them, especially the centrists. But that's where a lot of the discussions in the party take place. That's where a lot of the debate takes place, and that's where we can move some minds. That's where we can convince some people that might not be on our side to come over to our side. And every inch that we can get of ground in that is important. That's why I've been on the platform committee all the way up to state since 2016, because those are the discussions we need to be having with our friends and fellows. And if we're going to make it change any hearts and minds, it's got to be on the floor of the convention. It's got to be on the streets and on the ground. So that's part of why I see the platform as entirely important. And while a lot of us recognize we weren't going to have the votes to vote down the platform, just having over 800 people vote against the platform specifically for the fact that Medicare for All was left out sends a powerful message.
Absolutely it does. And I mean, the overarching issue here, the way that I look at it is, supporting the platform at this juncture is a pledge. You're pledging your support of all of that. You're pledging your support of the candidates, obviously, Biden and Harris. But if you're a blue, no matter who person, but don't pledge at this point. Demand things, and that's what you're doing. These are the things that we want before you get our support. If you pledge your support now, they're not going to give you that stuff. And as I say on the podcast, because of the money that's involved, and God, if you've turned on a television set here, if you've got electricity anytime in the past couple of weeks, all of those television commercials, also on the internet, everywhere, that stuff has to be paid for, and they're not going to get that money. I keep telling folks from George and Brian, and that's not where that stuff comes from. It comes from these multinational oligarchs, these rich corporations that have vested interests in maintaining the status quo. They don't want Medicare for all. They don't want a Green New Deal. And a lot of it is the military-industrial complex that doesn't want an end to regime change wars, at least 7 of which we're involved in right now. And they're going to hold sway. The IOUs are going to come due after the candidates are elected, and we're not going to get any change. And Brian's right. You got to hold their feet to the fire. You got to vote that platform down. And if we don't get what we want, if on day one, if Joe Biden's elected, he doesn't seriously start to address this climate change situation, if we don't start to pull out of these ignorant, ill-advised wars, most notably Afghanistan. And Brian, my God, our entire Iowa congressional delegation voted to maintain the spending levels and to stay in Afghanistan. That stuff has got to end. If it doesn't, then it's yellow vest time. It's out in the streets. I mean, you see that all the time in France and in Europe, and that's what we've got to do. We had success doing that back when I was a very young man when it came to the Vietnam War, and that was with a Democrat in office, with LBJ ran him out of there. I mean, that's what you got to do, folks, and that's what may be ahead for us if we don't get what we want and what this country so desperately needs, particularly now in this time of COVID-19, the highest unemployment levels the country's ever seen, tens of millions of Americans facing evictions from their homes. It's all coming, folks. So, Brian, all I can say is good on you. Now, what's ahead on that? What's yet to come?
I think we're already seeing it. And while it's very clear that they won't give us the White House, you look around at the latest primaries, at what has taken place since 2018. There are Democrats that have been in their seats for decades.
Yes.
And they are getting booted and replaced by working class progressives.
It's happening.
New York they're just ramping up in New York. We had Cori Bush that ended up winning a seat that's been held by a family dynasty for 50 years. I think that's where we're headed right now. And I will say this, as a totally anti-fascist action, I will be voting for Joe Biden this November. Doesn't matter who is president in January, I will be railing against them in order to make sure that we keep on going the direction that we need to go. But I think that's where we are actually heading, is we need to get Congress. We need to get the legislature. We need to get dog catcher. It's time for us to build up the foundation and truly make this a system where we're building from the ground up. And if we end up taking those seats, if we end up making enough noise, if we get enough political power, it doesn't matter if Joe Biden says, if I end up seeing a Medicare for all bill cross my desk, I'm not going to veto it. If we have enough political power, he won't dare do that. So that's where we need to go next. And we already see it. We see people in the streets. We see people that are activated. We see people that are running for office that never considered running for office. I had no idea that I would be running for and winning Progressive Caucus chair in the Iowa Democratic Party, but here I am. This is every wave starts with a ripple. And the ripple's getting bigger.
Like I said, I'm not pledging my support at this juncture. People say, well, my God, you're not going to vote for Trump, are you? Well, here's the thing. I'm just not telling Biden that I'm going to vote for him. Probably will. Not going to pledge my support now. Why? Because of the climate crisis issue and because of these regime change wars. Brian, I tell everybody we could be dead in 20 minutes because of a nuclear missile, because of these wars that we're involved in, and because of the president's meddling and the sanctions that we have against these other nations. 20 minutes is all it would take. We could all be dead within 20 years because of the climate crisis. So those are two huge issues. And if you vote for Trump, and you go out and try to get him to do something on climate crisis, if you try to go into the street with him, you'll get black bagged. I mean, you might get shot. You might disappear from the face of the earth. So probably not going to vote for Trump. Biden's probably not going to do anything, but at least if I go out and try to make him do something about it, I'm not going to disappear in the back of a black van someplace. So that's probably going to be what we're left with. But regardless, like you said, then that looks like to me where the real work is going to begin. The voting part of it's easy. It's going to take an effort like we've never had before, maybe going back decades, if even, and probably even more than that, to get the change that we got to have, or it could be game over in 20 minutes or 20 years. Brian, again, I really appreciate you coming on. Anything you want to close with on this topic? I never want to cut you off. I always want you to have the last word if you want it.
As a member of the American Postal Workers Union, I want to tell everybody that we will do our due diligence to do our job. Things are getting hard, but we've been through hard times before. And like you said, rain nor sleet nor snow nor fascist dictator.
Yeah,
we'll get our job done because that's our duty.
They're coming down the road, folks. I can see them in a cloud of brown dust headed my way. I mean, I'll never forget it as long as I live. Folks, that's Brian Maclaine. He's the chairman of the Iowa Democratic Progressive Caucus, virtually attending the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee, and also, most notably, the reason he's here today, he's with the American Postal Workers Union Local 44, talking about the USPS under attack. And if you like Podcast by George, please visit our website. It's podcastbygeorge.com, and then select the platform that you'd like to subscribe to. There are little icons, little badges there. Just click on one, and whatever's easiest for you, you can get each and every Podcast by George the moment that it's uploaded. But that's going to do it for today. That's all there is, and there ain't no more, as I like to say. That's another podcast by George.